This is World to Win, bringing you the latest news and analysis from a socialist perspective.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of World to Win. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also click the bell button so that you're notified when we next go live and also when we upload new videos. Today we have a very special episode. So I'm sure you've all heard about the developments in China and Hong Kong in the past year or so. And the ISS now launched a new campaign, which is Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong. So today we'll be talking to Jacko from Hong Kong and also other activists from Hong Kong and China about the background to this solidarity appeal, to this campaign, and also what's happening in China and Hong Kong right now. Of course, as people might know, the situation in both China and Hong Kong is a little bit steamy, let's say, and the heroic activities of our members are incredibly dangerous under the Chinese repressive regime. So that means that some of the people that we're going to talk to today aren't going to be able to show their faces on camera, but don't worry about it because what they have to say is really important, and also we're going to make it as easy as possible with some really exciting videos from what was happening in Hong Kong and China. So before we start, I'd like everyone to take a minute and post a message of solidarity in the comments, because our members and our activists are seeing this, and obviously the situation is awful. So it'd be really good to hear some solidarity from everyone. And before we go into that, while you put your solidarity messages, I want to say hi to Toya, my co-host. How are you doing?
How's it going, Yara? It's great to see you, and I'm really excited for this episode. I mean, I'm sure people have seen what's been going on in the US with the Stop Asian Hate movement. And so I'm excited to talk about how, there's connections to what's going on in Hong Kong and China and also here in the US, and how this is just going to be, a global issue affecting everybody. So it's great to see you, and I'm excited for the episode this week.
I'm really excited too. I think it's always so interesting. I feel like I'm always trying to avoid the situation in China when I'm reading or hearing about things because it's just so complicated. But every time I talk to our members and our activists from that region, it's always becoming clearer and clearer. And I completely agree that it's not just with the movement in the US right now, but generally the way that the Chinese regime affects the world, and kind of like the collision between the collision between the US and China, and like the blocks, really interesting and really important for Marxists to understand, and also everyone in the world to understand, really. So I want to dive into the episode first. So let's start with Hong Kong. Hong Kong is facing unprecedented repression right now. The Chinese dictatorship is cracking down like never before. We've seen Hong Kong as, it's always talked about as kind of like a beacon of democracy around the region, but we're seeing that kind of very quickly is becoming disillusioned with that. And opposition activists and also trade unionists are under attack from the national security law, which Beijing passed 9 months ago. The US and the EU are hitting Chinese government officials with sanctions, which kind of just marks a new escalation of the Cold War between China and the West. And the idea that a lot of commentators were talking about that this Cold War is going to slow down with Joe Biden replacing Trump has been proven to be completely wrong. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that with Jacko, but before we go into that, I want to ask Sean to tell us more about what's happening in Hong Kong right now. So over to you, Sean.
Hello, comrades. In January, 53 Hong Kong opposition activists and politicians were arrested for subversion of state power. This was the biggest use so far of the national security law enacted by China last year. They were arrested for organizing and standing in a primary to decide on candidates for the next local election. That's the so-called parliament at Hong Kong. Basically, the whole field, from left to right, of opposition candidates are now arrested. The penalties are severe, up to life imprisonment. On February 28th, The trials of 47 of the arrested began. This is a show trial against those seen as symbols of the 2019 struggle. Among those charged are veteran left-wing grassroots fighter Longhair, also Joshua Wong, the favorite of Western bourgeois liberals. Also trade union representatives. This includes the Confederation of Trade Unions chairperson Carol Ng and the chairwoman of the New Public Hospital Workers Union Winnie Yu, who organized the medical workers' strike last year at the beginning of the pandemic. It is not an accident that Xi Jinping's dictatorship also attacks workers and unions. Look at history. The workers' movement has always played a key role in the struggle for democracy. In Russia, in February 1917, it wasn't liberal parties and capitalists who led the revolution that brought down the Tsar's dictatorship. It was the workers led by socialists and Marxists. The liberal pan-democrats in Hong Kong may not know this history, but the Chinese dictatorship has a clear understanding. If it exempts the trade unions from the current repression, this will come back to bite it in the future. Earlier this month, China's NPC, its so-called parliament, endorsed a new political system for Hong Kong. This puts the final nail in the coffin of Hong Kong's pseudo-democracy. The LegCo in Hong Kong was never democratic, but under the new rules, it will become a complete rubber stamp. The number of seats elected by voters will drop from 50% to only 22%. A leading Japanese newspaper pointed out that this is less than under the wartime military dictatorship in Japan. There are reports that the next targets of the Xi's dictatorship are the opposition parties and organizations. The regime is investigating whether groups like the Civil Human Rights Front, which organizes the annual massive July 1st demo and the huge demos in 2019, have received financial support from foreign governments. This is a false accusation. But if found guilty, these organizations will be banned. This also means that the Confederation of Trade Unions, which has received money from the NED in the US, could be under attack. The CCP's repression will not stop unless they face revolutionary struggles in Hong Kong and China. Yet, the bourgeois democrats are not putting up a fight. Instead, they are in retreat. Major parties like the Democratic Party and the Civic Party, also the Professional Teachers Union, are withdrawing from the front in the hope of protecting themselves. The dictatorship's real target is not these parties, not even the front, but to ban the mass demos. The front organized the giant demos in 2019 with 1.7 million and 2.3 million on the streets. Socialist Action, which is ISA in Hong Kong, applied to join the front in defense of the right of protest. If this attack succeeds, the next target will be to ban the annual commemoration of June 4th, the Beijing massacre in 1989. Xi's policies are stoking mass anger and political radicalization, which cannot indefinitely be suppressed by police measures, especially in mainland China. We stress that the struggle for democracy must link up with the vast working class in China in a common anti-capitalist revolutionary struggle. Thank you.
So we saw, a few years back, the huge movement that took place in Hong Kong, the democracy movement, which we've talked about on our show, and the International Socialist Alternative has tons of material So you can read about what went on there during that time if you're not, aware of the huge mass movement that inspired people across the world. But I want to talk a little bit about what's going on now. We've seen, basically the CCP, the Communist Party of China in Beijing has control over what's going on in Hong Kong in a very undemocratic way, to say the least. So I want to talk a little bit about, what's the mood of the people there in Hong Kong, and is there a way that they can fight back against this, Beijing control? Jacko, what's your take on this?
Mass people in Hong Kong are still very, very angry. The Chinese dictatorship and Carrie Lam government cannot gain any support from this repression. While this is a counter-revolution situation, the repression is really extremely brutal. It doesn't mean that Hong Kong will go back to the period before 2019. The extreme hatred against this government and the police will not go down. And young people are ready to die to fight against police and dictators. And the illusion to the so-called one country, two system, which is a fake promise from the Chinese government that they will allow some autonomy to Hong Kong, this illusion is already smashed. And while this is impossible to organize big mass demonstration now because of the gathering ban under pandemic, the anger that will just accumulate in the next period, and the government is still very unstable. And at the same time, there, of course, we recognize there's a mood of frustration. For example, in opinion polls, 30% of the youth are planning to immigrate from Hong Kong. There's a strong sense of no hope and a gloomy future of China taking over. So that for example, there's a very popular slogan among young protester layers in Hong Kong, that the slogan of mutual destruction, which is a main slogan of the young candidates for the legislative election last year, which was a primary election, and it was attacked under the national security law now. This slogan of mutual destruction means that we have no stake in the society anyway under this system, and let's do anything to pay any price to paralyze the government and economy, to support, for example, foreign sanctions, in order to stop the running of the society. And of course, we know that this is a combination of extreme anger against the establishment, but also this also shows frustration and a lack of clear political alternative. And most people still lack confidence that they can really defeat the dictatorship, and they are not yet clear what kind of new system they really want. And not only repression, the economy is also very in a situation that offer a very dark future for workers and youth. Hong Kong has a highest unemployment rate for 17 years now. The wealth gap is the most extreme among all advanced capitalist countries. So all these combined make young people feeling that they have nothing to lose anymore. And also there's a big fear of repression and surveillance, and that's why the government will still be unstable, and we don't know which city from the whole China will explode protests in the next period. It can be Hong Kong, or even it can be other cities in mainland China, where in mainland China the radicalization of the youth is becoming growing very fast. So this situation shows that the counter-revolution, the dictatorship cannot achieve what they want from the counter-revolution.
It's so incredible to hear what you're talking about. I think that the point that you made just at the start about how people in Hong Kong and in China are willing to actually die while fighting this regime. I think this is an incredible thing to even think about. I think in a lot of countries that there is even a consideration. But I think, like you described really, really well, this is something that is on the cards. And not just that, is obviously there is that, but also prosecutions and just general kind of like attacks on organizations and also individuals and protests. So speaking about that, we have a short video from our members in Hong Kong who explain the kind of case of Longhair, who is a left activist and also former legislator, who is charged with subversion in Hong Kong. So really interested to hear about that.
This is Leung Kwok Hong. He is better known as Longhair. He is in prison awaiting trial under the National Security Law. Longhair represents the League of Social Democrats, and he was the only left representative in the old Legislative Council. As a legislator, Longhair refused to take the full legislator's salary. It is well known that he still lives in a small public housing apartment. The new international campaign, Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong, will feature the demands to release the political prisoners. There are many different political viewpoints among the prisoners. Some are liberals, some are localists. As socialists, we would strongly disagree with some of them. But of course, they are innocent. Longhair is a sincere fighter for democratic rights and workers' causes. He has stood up for the rights of refugees and against racism and discrimination by the Hong Kong government. Longhair was also imprisoned by the British colonial administration 40 years ago. This time, he could be sentenced to life imprisonment. Today, he is charged with conspiracy to subvert state power because, like 50 other candidates, he participates in a primary organized by pro-democracy groups. The CCP says the primary was an attempt to overthrow the government. The CCP will never allow any opposition to win an election. You can send a letter to Longhair in prison to show your support. You can get your trade union branch to send a letter. There are strict rules from the prison authorities about what you can put in a letter. So send them to us. Our campaign will coordinate. Please check the details on our Facebook page, Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong.
So what's become clear, discussing the situation in Hong Kong is the need for struggle to be connected with workers and youth all over the world. And this is one of the reasons that it didn't succeed in Hong Kong, is because if we don't internationalize the struggle, we can't truly fight against the capitalist class, which is organized internationally. So now we have an exciting part where we're going to hear from a Chinese comrade in mainland China, Lance, and he's going to fill us in a little bit more about the situation that's going on there, which sometimes it's hard for us to get all this info on. So this part is very exciting. Lance?
Hello, I am Lance. Thank you for inviting me onto World to Win. In China, state repression is accelerating, with the attack on democratic rights in Hong Kong being a part of this wider process. The so-called communist regime led by Xi Jinping is doing this because it needs to show strength against US and Western meddling. This has become more important during the new Cold War. This is not only to warn foreign governments. There are power struggles inside the CCP regime, and Xi Jinping needs to show a hard line against his rivals. Xi Jinping has to use Han nationalist and chauvinist policies to divert public anger from the real causes of the increasing economic, political, and social problems. Although China is one of a few economies globally which had GDP growth in 2020, it had the weakest growth rate since 1976. Some statistical exaggeration has always been used. Still, going by the official data, China's economy grew by 2.3% last year. Projections of China's growth this year range between 7% and 10%, But if we combine the 2 years, 2020 and 2021, it's around 6% per year or possibly lower. So the long-term slowdown of China's economy is continuing. As a point of reference, the US economy is forecasted to grow by 6.5% this year. So China's V-shaped recovery is not so remarkable. Workers are not gaining from this economic growth. For the first time since 2009, not a single Chinese province increased the minimum wage last year. A recent Pew survey shows that the number living on low income increased by 30 million in 2020, and 10 million fell out of the middle class. The government is also preparing to launch an attack on pensions, starting by raising the female retirement age from 55 to 60 to achieve so-called equality with men. This is because the pension system is running out of money. Also, falling birth rates and a shrinking labor force means that China faces a demographic crisis. This is made worse by galloping debt level. The central bank says that China's total debt rose to 280% of GDP in 2020, up from 255% of GDP in 2019. This is a very fast and dangerous growth of debt, which cannot be sustained without causing a financial crisis at some point in the future. Since 2014, Xi's regime has also implemented ultra-repressive policies in Xinjiang. 1 to 3 million people, mainly Muslim Uyghurs, but also other non-Han ethnic groups, such as Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, have been sent to detention camps for the so-called re-education. People who have a beard, quit smoking, or watch foreign religious TV programs can all be considered extremists and sent to the detention camps. Victims are asked to abandon their religious beliefs and declare allegiance to the CCP regime, otherwise they will be beaten or deprived of food and drink. The repression is much more severe than other parts of China. This includes a mass surveillance system with racially specific technology that can identify Uyghur faces, the massive checking of ID cards and mobile phones by the police, and the mandatory installation of surveillance apps in mobile phones. But with the repression escalating, many Han Chinese residents have realized they are also victims of CCP rule. At the same time, many counter-reforms can spark major unrest. Workers in China have tried to organize for basic rights. For example, delivery drivers called for a strike on 8th March after the arrest of a driver who formed an informal or independent union. In China, independent trade unions have always been outlawed. Within CCP, there are power struggles. Xi's factional rivals are uneasy over the direction of the state. They think that Xi's authoritarian policies and nationalist war-warrior foreign policies have gone too far and made unnecessary troubles. There is a fear that he is too reckless. This will create a bigger backlash from other capitalist powers with his aggressive and militarist policies, like in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Also, his policies will create an internal backlash. Myanmar shows that all dictatorships eventually face mass resistance. The Chinese economy is actually very vulnerable to decoupling and protectionism from Western capitalism, which Xi tries to play down. In conclusion, the CCP dictatorship is sitting on a time bomb. By continually doubling down on hardline repressive policies, while workers' conditions are getting worse, Xi's regime is creating an explosive future.
So we've just heard from Lance about the CCP regime, and we've heard that it's facing a lot more difficulties than most people around the world are aware of. I think it's really interesting, especially in the context of every time first of all, I think the CCP regime tries to present this facade of being super, super organized, super united, and it's really interesting to hear that it's not. But I also think that you would think that the global media would kind of eat it up and kind of talk about it all the time, but at the same time we're seeing from global media the same facade. So it's really interesting to hear what's actually happening. And I think it's also very important for us to understand, it's important for our understanding of why the CCP regime is going so hard at Hong Kong. And I think it's clear why it's escalating this. But also, it's Hong Kong, but also it's the Cold War that we were talking about a little bit. And I think this is a really interesting point for a lot of people outside of China and Hong Kong, but also in. because, after so long of the US and China kind of working together, we're suddenly seeing those drifting apart. And this, I think, is really making it clear why this struggle between the US and China is so acute. So, Jacko, what do you think? How do you see this US-China Cold War developing? How do you think it will affect Hong Kong as well?
Both China and US imperialism, they need to demonstrate their nationalism and to use it to divert the attention of the mass people in their own country. Because there's a big crisis in China now since the pandemic. And so they need Xi Jinping, especially to gain his authority. He needs nationalism in order to bring the social problem and the system problem to foreign powers. And for example, recently in this Alaska meeting, the Chinese diplomats was very unusually using very hard rhetoric to speak against the US administration. This is very unusual for them because China has been using a lot of moderate rhetoric, trying to present themselves as a peaceful global power or to maintain the world order. But in this meeting, there was one of the diplomats called Yang. He spoke for 16 minutes, arguing China has a good human rights condition, and the internal affairs of China has no business with the U.S. And he blamed the U.S. is like a big system of big crisis. And the target of this speech is not really speaking to the U.S. government, but to speak to their audience in at their home, because they want to now there's a big state propaganda in China now to compare this meeting to the meeting in 1901 when the old Chinese feudal dynasty had a loss in the war against the imperialist powers, and they were in a meeting that's signing a very insulting deals. And they say now China is rising up, and we are a strong world power. This and also it is very revealing that there's a detail that when Yang made the speech, he spoke with in Chinese for 60 minutes without any pause for translation. So this is unusual in such meeting, and it tells us that he is really not speaking to the U.S. government officials, but to the Chinese masses to wipe up nationalism. And this is the China-U.S. conflict will not go down under the Biden administration. We can see there has been escalation of China-U.S. conflict since Biden came to power. Biden will have a more moderate rhetoric compared to Trump. And however, the anti-China policy will be more coherent and more comprehensive to contain China. And unlike Trump, trade will no longer be the main issue under Biden. However, there's the imperialist power struggle on other aspects, including tech war, spy war, and also military conflict, especially in South China Sea and Taiwan. These will be the main issue that Biden will use in order to attack the Xi Jinping government. And also, we can see with the sanction from the EU on the issue of the camp in Xinjiang. And this sanction, now China takes countermeasures against the sanctions of EU. And the EU-China trade deal, which was signed last year, it is really under threat now. So we can see in this period, the normal economic deals or the normal economic interests of the capitalists will be secondary, and the political struggle will be the main issue between these powers. So this is a lesson for us to foresee how how the global capitalist crisis will develop in the next period. And also the human rights issue or democracy issue, that Biden will use it for. They don't really care the democratic right in Hong Kong or China. What they want is to fight for their geopolitical power and influence. And so we also need to be very alert that the people in Hong Kong and China should not have any illusion to this U.S. imperialism, that they will become a savior for the struggle, the democratic rights now in Hong Kong. And we must have a independent working class and internationalist approach, with a independent position of from China and U.S. imperialism, and organize with like trade unions, workers' organization, protest groups, to unite around the world with the grassroots and working class people around the world to fight against the dictatorship.
Thank you so much for this, Jacko. I think this is really important to put this kind of like internationalist lens on what we're talking about, because it's not just a situation about, like, nothing is a situation that's only existing in one country. But I think specifically with, like you explained, with a place like China, like Hong Kong, it's so overreaching throughout the world. And I think it's really important that we understand it. So we have another video that I want to kind of introduce, because it will talk a little bit about the campaign that we have launched, which I'm really excited to hear more about. But I think it will also give us some information about kind of what is needed in China and Hong Kong. What is it that the activists from the ISA are doing there, what we're fighting for. So really excited to hear that.
Hello, thanks for inviting me on Road to Win. Today in Hong Kong, the Chinese state is attacking everything: trade unions, independent media, social media, the universities, the legal system, and of course, the pro-democracy opposition parties. This is counter-revolution. It is the capitalist Xi Jinping regime attacking the rights of workers and ordinary people. It is part of a wider pattern in China. Democracy is not just about elections. Socialists and the working class also fight to defend the right to organize, freedom of assembly, freedom to say and print what we believe. These things are fundamental to building a working class political alternative. The right to strike and the right to form trade unions, all these things are under attack, as they were in Europe in the 1930s from nationalist and fascist regimes. When Western capitalist governments say these things, it is hypocritical, but workers and socialists have the right to speak about this reality. Comrades in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan applaud the decision of ISA to launch the campaign Solidarity Against Repression in China and Hong Kong. Please do what you can to raise this issue and get support from workers and young people. The US government suddenly objects to repression and totalitarian rule in China. The change in Washington's tone is only because of the Cold War, the struggle between US and Chinese imperialism. But the US also provides military support for 73% of world's dictatorships, including Egypt, Ethiopia, Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, and Vietnam. We want our international comrades to understand that the situation is very serious. Please understand that the struggle will continue. Even if the situation is difficult, it is not game over for the future mass struggles in China and Hong Kong. Myanmar shows that workers and young people will never surrender to dictatorship. But what is needed is a clear strategy and understanding of how to rebuild the struggle. The Chinese dictatorship has not won any support with its hardline repression, and the pro-capitalist Hong Kong government is more hated than ever. Many youth in China also support the Hong Kong struggle. There is growing radicalization among Chinese youth and workers. Nationalist propaganda and censorship are not enough to prevent this. This is also why Xi Jinping is escalating the repression. He needs to continually escalate because he is afraid for the future of his regime. Marxists and ISA warned about this. In 2019, we were active and supported the mass protest, but we also stressed the need for a different direction. We said that the protests in Hong Kong weren't enough, despite being probably the biggest per capita protest in world history. A so-called normal government could have been beaten by such a movement, but not the CCP, as it is the world's biggest dictatorship. One city alone cannot win. We said the struggle needs to spread to China, to the working class, which is a potential force of over 700 million people. So everything that helps to spread the struggle to China is progressive, and everything that prevents this is unfortunately not helpful and not progressive. This is why we very firmly warn against any trust in the US, the UK, the EU, and many capitalist governments. They would sabotage the struggle for democracy. We fully support the 5 demands of the Hong Kong movement, but we also explain that they're not enough. These demands have huge support among Hong Kong people, including the release of the political prisoners, to bring the brutal police force to justice, and to achieve one person, one vote. But these demands only focus on the democratic rights in Hong Kong. They don't mean so much for workers and oppressed people in China. So to spread the struggle to China, a different program is needed, a 6th, 7th, and 8th demand. The struggle needs to take aim at capitalism, which is an intrinsic part of the totalitarian system. In China and Hong Kong, capitalism and dictatorship go hand in hand. So if you only fight just one, you won't succeed. Therefore, a movement confined to Hong Kong won't be enough. This is also why international solidarity can't only just focus on Hong Kong. Correctly, ISA says solidarity against repression in China as well as Hong Kong. Comrades should understand that some important local factors created barriers to the development of the struggle in 2019. Localists, right-wing Hong Kong nationalist current, want to turn their backs on China, including ordinary Chinese people. This is one of the barriers to building a united struggle. Most localists are fanatical Trump supporters and, for example, attack the BLM movement in US as a plot of Chinese government. And the main pan-democratic parties, we can call them bourgeois liberals, have also stood for compromise with the dictatorship. They encourage the mistaken idea that Hong Kong is unique and can get gradual democratic reforms from Beijing if the demands are moderate, and they accept the dictatorship rule in China. They encourage that the belief of one country, two systems is a good and sustainable system. It was possible to develop democracy in the Hong Kong part of the two systems. But we explained that it was impossible for one country, two systems to last if the dictatorship remained in power. Our warning has unfortunately been vindicated. The national security law is the end of the one country, two systems in Hong Kong, and only a shell remains. We stand for continued struggle for democratic rights as a workers' struggle against capitalism in China and globally. In 1848, Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto wrote, "The first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy." For us, these words still show the way forward. Thank you, comrades.
So, our comrades in Hong Kong and China very much need financial support to fight this campaign against the dictatorship. And so there are ways that you watching this show, wherever you are, on your phone, on your computer, in your house, in your car, there are ways that you can help with this campaign. So Jacko, can you explain to our viewers what they can do to support this campaign in Hong Kong and China?
The ISA launched International Solidarity campaign to get support from workers and youth around the world to fight against dictatorship. We need your support in solidarity action, but also financial support to defend democratic rights, but also defend ISA in Hong Kong and China. Under severe repression in Hong Kong, Socialist Action is organizing semi-underground now. Our public activities face continuous police harassment. Our personal security is threatened. A pro-CCP website put up personal and family details of protesters in Hong Kong, and one of our comrades' detail is on it. Xi Jinping will not stop this repression unless there's a mass revolutionary upheaval. The repression will continue and it is a long term. They will not make significant reform on democratic right unless there's a mass revolutionary upheaval. Our organization is going into a difficult period, but we think we can still organize, fight, and also grow. While the other opposition liberal parties stop their public activities, we're still going on spreading socialist idea and also defend democratic right on the street. We can do it because the Marxist and internationalist perspective to allow us to look further and wider from Hong Kong. Also, because of the sacrifices of our comrades and the tightness of our organization, we are able to turn into this new situation and to defend our organization. Many organizations decide to dissolve itself or planning to do so. The pandemocrats cannot survive without parliamentary election, but also Marxists can have a tradition to organize on the street with workers and also to organize underground, like the Bolshevik Party in the early 20th century in Russia. ISA is the only Marxist organization internationally working in mainland China. Our comrades in mainland China are arrested last year for joining our action, joining our organization. All of them take risks of personal security or even risk of going into prison for joining ISA. The new generation of socialists are becoming increasingly courageous and sacrificing. We have our bi-monthly magazine with over 1,000 of subscribers. There has been increasing interest in subscribing our magazine. Our comrades in mainland China are involved in writing these materials. We have several young comrades in China arrested by security agents last year. We don't get any finance support from corporations or the state. We need finance support from our comrades, workers, and youth supporters. Please go to the link on the screen to set up a monthly donation with your credit card. A monthly donation will be much better than a one-off donation. $20-30 per month is a big support for us. Our full-timers have a very low salary, lower than minimum wage level. We need a stable and regular strong financial base to continue our work. So please go to the link and make a monthly donation to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacko, and thank you to everyone who took their time to record these videos. I think this has been really, really educational, really interesting. And I urge everyone who's watching it to first go and follow the Facebook page and also donate and follow everything that Jack has just said. Obviously, the situation in China and Hong Kong is a very extreme situation, and anyone who can help, that would be incredible for our comrades, and that is also why we've launched this campaign. So please go and do that. But before we move on, I just want to mention that, like we said, this is a situation that doesn't only affect China and Hong Kong. We've seen this pandemic affect the way, the pandemic that started in China affect the entire world. And we have to kind of always reiterate how international all of these issues are. And I think it's really clear that from the pandemic, we've seen Asian people in particular facing kind of like a heightened risk of racist attacks in Western countries. And that is because a lot of it is because of the kind of rhetoric that figures like Trump used when talking about the COVID pandemic. And our solidarity campaign is going to link all of these issues together. The issues of state repression, but also the democratic rights, to anti-racist initiatives and united struggle as well. And I think it's not obviously not lucky, but it's a coincidence but not really a coincidence that we've seen this attack going on in the US right now, specifically against Asian people. So I was wondering if, Toya, can you tell us a little bit about what happened in Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, Yara, it was not a coincidence. I mean, the buildup to this terrible, tragedy we've seen in like mass media, especially the Financial Times, which that's what the capitalists like to use to talk about what their perspectives are on things. But lots of other different types of media, these demonizing articles and photos of anti-China, and so it's no coincidence that while the ruling class and the capitalists are using nationalism and racist language in the corporate media, that at the same time, as you mentioned, the pandemic starting in China, we've seen attacks, thousands over the past year. But it's no coincidence that at the same time, this man in Georgia went to a store and bought a gun, and less than an hour or so later went and murdered 8 people, 6 of them being Asian American women. And might I say, Yara, that it's easier in the state of Georgia to buy a gun and kill someone than it is to register to vote. It's an absolute atrocity. But it's totally connected. The way that racism is put out into the world through the corporate media and the way that it's taken in. And yes, of course, as you mentioned, the rhetoric that Trump had said over the past year with the pandemic, saying terrible things about why the virus is here, saying the awful thing like Kung flu, which is just terrible and disgusting. And you see on social media, there was this one really touching video of a school teacher in New York City, and she was saying the hateful things that her students were saying to her because of what they see in the corporate media, because of what they hear from their parents, just because she's of Asian descent. And then on top of that, you've got the effect of the trade war and the effect of this, as Jacko explained, these US-China relations, but also this man was targeting women. He murdered women because of, his ideas of, I don't know, it's crazy what he was talking about, the reason that he murdered women. But, we just recently talked about the violence against women that we've seen heightened during the pandemic. And so all of these things are just related. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, it's not just a question of racism and white supremacy. There's really a role that capitalism is playing in these types of atrocities. And it's a terrible, terrible situation. Socialist Alternative in the US put out a statement. You can check out socialistalternative.org to read our analysis on the situation. But it's scary, Yara.
Yeah, and I think it's also, at the start of the pandemic, when Trump started coming up with his horrifying terminology about the pandemic, people were just saying, well, it's just words. What can words do? And I think this kind of shows how people and figures like Trump, even if they don't actively go and do something racist, the way that they talk, the way that they act, it's kind of building this consciousness, but also allowing for people who are racists to kind of come out of the holes, and kind of it builds up in this horrible way. And I think that completely connects to also how we talk about how Trump talks about women and the way that we've seen that struggle go on. And I also think like the fact that this man was talking about the women that he killed as if they don't matter because of whether they were sex workers or not is just ridiculous. And especially in the context of what we're talking about racism, about immigration, about trafficking in a lot of cases, is just so horrifying to see this misogynistic and racist perspective about people who either did not choose to move or chose to move and were faced with impossible situations due to this capitalist system that makes people go into the kind of like lowest positions in their lives just to make ends meet. And to be punished for that is just absolutely disgusting.
It really is. But on, this topic of fighting racism and white supremacy, I'm very excited for our shout out of the week. Unfortunately, our guest who's going to talk about the shout out, I know we normally don't do that. Normally we just talk about it, but this is so exciting. We wanted to have a guest come and talk about it. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it on the show with us today, but we have a video of me interviewing him about our shout out. So here is Ryan from Socialist Alternative in Chicago.
We can all get more together than we can apart. We can get more organized together than we can apart. And this is the way we gain power. Power is the ability to achieve purpose. Power is the ability to affect change. And we need power. What is power? Power is the ability of labor unions like UAW to make the most powerful corporation in the world, General Motors, say yes when it wants to say no. That's power. Amazon is worth $1.56 trillion with a T, making it one of the most powerful corporations today and in history. And we are going to make them say yes to workers' power, say yes to economic prosperity, making them say yes to what it really means to make Black Lives Matter. Solidarity to Amazon workers and solidarity to the entire Asian American community. Thank you.
So what you just saw was Ryan Watson, who's a member of Socialist Alternative in Chicago. And like I said earlier, we're doing a special shout out of the week this week, where Ryan took the time to come in and talk with us about an exciting announcement that we have in Socialist Alternative in the US. So welcome, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. I love seeing that video. It's great seeing you in action. So for our shout out of the week this week, can you let our viewers know what is happening in the US section of Socialist Alternative?
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me, Toya. So we just launched this caucus called the Black Caucus of the Socialist Alternative, which essentially is an extension of the POC caucus that has already been in existence for quite some time.
This is so exciting and super timely. Obviously, it shows that, the organization is growing immensely, and, we're recruiting all sorts of people in our organization, young, old, workers, students. But what exactly is a Black Caucus, and, what types of things will the Black Caucus do?
As the name assumes, the Black Caucus is just a place for Black members of the organization to be able to come together, discuss like political perspectives and kind of the politics of what it means to be working class and Black in the U.S. and figuring out ways that we can kind of struggle around to fight back against the dual issues of racism and capitalism, ideas that have been around for decades. You've had people like Ella Baker, Martin Luther King, Huey Newton, W.B. Du Bois, you name it. They've drawn the conclusions and the connections of these two ills of U.S. society, and so we want to kind of create a situation in the U.S. where we can kind of discuss these ideals and discuss the dynamics of the struggle that is growing around us, especially in the wake of the struggles that we've seen in the last year.
Absolutely. Being a member of Socialist Alternative, you have these analysis where you're discussing not just capitalism and socialism, but also the special oppression that we feel as workers and youth. And it's so important that we take the time and we create the space to allow for this to happen. But Ryan, I gotta ask, why now? Why, in 2021? Yeah, what sparked this now?
I mean, it's a great question. Why now? Because what do we see around us? We've seen the biggest explosion of actions and activity in America in decades. And actually, I think this is the largest mobilization. I think it's 20 million people were on the streets in all 50 states not including the rest of the world, which that number, blows out of the water even further. But I think it's the biggest action that we've seen on U.S. land. And I think it's important for us to kind of be able to discuss in the ebbs and flows of this struggle what we think is coming down the pipeline. There are conversations around accountability of like activist community and also our elected officials. And a lot of that is coming out, specifically around the idea, like we saw that in 2020 around George Floyd, where, mayors were spray painting Black Lives Matter on the ground while at the exact same time funneling millions of dollars into the police, when one of the main demands from the movement was defund the police. So I think it's super important for us to kind of be able to draw the analysis of like scientific socialism that connects us to understand that we can't address racism, without addressing capital, and especially when we're seeing a flourishing of a Black misleadership class, and a Black billionaire class, that it's going to be super important to kind of be able to address it and be like, here's a counter analysis, a working class analysis, a socialist analysis that will be able to, respond to these, because obviously there's a definite need for that, because most people are looking at these things and they're like, I'm curious to what this is. So we want to give voice to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you mentioned the Black leadership class, and we're seeing a lot coming out in the media about, what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, and, people like, Tamir Rice's mother speaking out against people profiting off of the movement. And all of these things need to be discussed. We need to address these issues. But this is a huge step forward for the organization. I'm so excited that we're launching this caucus. So just one more question for you, Ryan. How can people find out, about the caucus and what it is that, the Black Caucus is saying and doing? How can people reach out?
Well, in terms of like social media, you can find us on Instagram, where we'll be, posting obviously pictures and videos, but also some of our articles will be alluded to inside the Instagram. But then you could go to the socialistalternative.org webpage to kind of read some of the articles that we have, which kind of illuminates kind of our perspectives that will come out of these meetings. But on a more specific, more kind of like introductory level, we have the April 4th action, which is actually Easter Sunday, but it is also the anniversary of the murder of Martin Luther King while he was in Memphis fighting for sanitation workers, in the wake of two people dying in the back of a sanitation truck. And so we want to, inaugurate the Black Caucus discussion on that day. It's going to be 6 p.m. Chicago time. So, but it's a national conference. So, a national discussion. So people should be interested in coming to that. And that's going to be a public meeting. And so we're going to have a link on the Instagram that's going to actually point towards a direction. You should register there and definitely come out. There'll be an introduction, and there'll be there'll be discussion there. So we want to open it up to anybody who is a working class socialist, maybe, to kind of come in and have this discussion, because I think through these perspective discussions, we can kind of be able to channel what direction we think is coming down the pipeline in the coming period, especially around like the discussion that you even brought out. If I'm correct, I think if Tamir Rice would have been alive today, he would have been 18. So I think it's super important to acknowledge. The mother lost her 12-year-old son, because he had a BB gun in his hand, and we've seen the video, And that her anger is righteous, and we need to be able to actually have something foundationally established that can be like, look, my son didn't die for no reason, and we want to fight for a society that there won't be any more Tamir Rices, and there won't be any more Breonna Taylors or Tony McDades or Mike Browns or George Floyd's and far too many other names that I can't even list out, or the Emmett Tills, So April 4th, if you're available, hopefully you can come off of family dinner if that's what you're doing that day, and you can just join us for a discussion that will be able to point in the direction of the next steps, and actually meeting with like-minded individuals about struggling for Black liberation and the liberation of all working people.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I'm so excited. Can't wait for the updates. And thank you for coming on the show. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in with us today. Ryan gave us a preview kind of what our episode will be next week. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel, hit the bell notification so you can get alerted when we put out new content. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks.
This is World to Win. Every Sunday, we broadcast with speakers from across the globe, bringing you the latest news and analysis on the fast-moving global events from a socialist perspective. Subscribe to the International Socialist Alternative's YouTube page and click the bell to get notified when we go live for a new episode. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, because there's a lot to do and we have a world to win.
When we fight! When we fight! When we fight! Solidarity!